What is going on? Welcome back to Jiu-Jitsu Outlet. I am here with Elisabeth Clay. Elizabeth, you are one of the best black belts in the world. And just recently, you dominated the Pan NoGi Championships. So congratulations on that. Congrats on being a badass. And recently,
Thanks.
you also competed at the World Championships. And you just like lately, you're all over flow grappling too lately. Like you're just you become like this badass ninja. So I wanted to ask, like, what has that done for your mental health? What has that done for your, I guess, internal dialogue, becoming this, high level competitor?
I think like with anything, one of the biggest things that, starting training, I think you always get is your coaches are always like, hey, don't let it get to your head. It's going to happen. Don't let it get to your head. And I don't know if a lot of people struggle with letting it get into their head, like kind of blowing themselves up in a fact that, it's kind of easy to get to the top, but staying there is the hardest part. And I think a lot of that is because people kind of let that get into their head that they're like, well, I'm the best. I'm winning this. And, I'm going to keep winning everything. And for me, I don't think that's ever been so much of a problem. I think from the outside, it's easy to kind of look and be like, oh, well, like you have to think like you're crazy good. You can't ever lose, all that stuff. And I really don't think personally, my mindset hasn't changed much from like blue to now. Blue to black belt. I feel like it's gotten better. Obviously, I've gotten better at the mental side of it, but I don't feel like there's been like this huge shift in my mind just because like, oh, now you're getting more on flow. Now you're doing, big competitions. It's a black belt. I think the biggest thing is just kind of staying, you have to stay down in that grind almost, I think, and be like, no, you have to keep working because especially I feel like, everybody says it like getting to the top is easy, staying there is the hard part. But I feel like it's so true. It's hard to stay at the top.
So what do you do to stay at the top? I mean, outside of obviously training your ass off. I mean, obviously you're training jujitsu all the time.
Yeah.
But just before we started the show, you were talking about that your body's feeling pretty beat up. So obviously you're putting in the mat time. But what are
Mm-hmm.
you doing? Is there anything that you're doing on like a mental side? Like, do you practice any sort of visualization or anything like that to get better?
I think as far as that goes, I'm more do it more casually, I would say. But I definitely like I listen to stuff like if I'm headed to the gym to go lift. There's a couple like motivational speaking that I'll do, but it's definitely more so like geared towards the athlete side of it that it's like you have to be constantly making yourself uncomfortable and constantly growing. When you find that like comfort spot, you're in trouble. You're not growing. And, as people, as humans, I think it's very common to kind of want to be comfortable. But unfortunately, it doesn't work when you're trying to grow in any aspect, not even just jujitsu or any sport in general, just trying to grow as a person. When you're comfortable, you're not growing. So I think a big thing, like if I'm headed to the gym, I'll throw on like just some stuff on Apple Music that they have. They're short, like 5 minutes. Throw that on, listen to it. Sometimes while I'm lifting, I'll have it going on while I'm doing it, and just kind of not that I stop and do it, but just kind of day to day casual stuff. Put something on just so that it's going on in the background, and your brain and everything it picks up on stuff like that when you're just around it. It doesn't have to be like, okay, I'm sitting down, I'm doing this visual thing or saying stuff. That type of stuff doesn't work for me because I won't do it. I'll do it for like 2 3 days and then I'm done with this. It doesn't work as far as like sitting down and doing it for me. So I just kind of put it on and it's in the background and I'll take it in that way.
It's almost like you're creating an environment of positivity or something. It's like
Exactly.
in the background noise almost. And that's powerful. And it's like seeping into your subconscious in a way. And one thing I wrote down, you said when you're comfortable, you're not growing. And that is so true. It is 1,000% true. I mean, you hear it all the time in jiu-jitsu that you've got to get comfortable becoming, or you've got to get comfortable being uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And something else that you reminded me of was I was in the army for 6 years, and something that they drilled into our head is this phrase that complacency kills. And what they would always
Yep.
say is that it's when you start to get complacent on a deployment or in some sort of a training exercise that's when a mistake gets made, is whenever
Exactly.
you start to relax and you just feel like, oh, I'm good or whatever. And that really speaks a lot, you know, to your mindset, and you're just having that awareness, because I think that that's so true. Like, you see so many people, especially at the highest levels of competition, where they get complacent and that's when they fall off. So
Hmm.
um that's powerful. And thanks for sharing that. I just
Of course.
I wanted to ask you about something else. What has jiu-jitsu done for your mental health just in general? Like, can you compare who were you before you started training jiu-jitsu compared to who are you today?
I think for me, because I was so young when I started training, I was only 12. But I think if I was to like look back, and even when I was that young, not necessarily that like jujitsu was this crazy thing that did it. Don't get me wrong, it did. But for me, sports in general were always a very big thing, and not just like casually doing sports. I think, if you watch my competitions or anything that I do, you can tell that like when I do something, I kind of put everything into it. And for me, that's always been what's like, even like on the mental side, not even just like physically. I'm at my best mentally when I'm in that constant, that working, that grind, that not even just jujitsu before I did gymnastics. And that was always the thing. Like I would put in extra hours outside of class time and was just kind of doing that thing. Because I think mentally I do better that way. But something that showed me like how much jujitsu does was during COVID. I think some people still got to train during that. Where I was off of training for like 2 months, and that was the longest I'd been out of training. Even when I blew my knee out, like I was still in the gym. Even if I wasn't able to train, I was still in the environment. I was still there. And being completely out of it with COVID that was hard. I hate running, but I was running like 4 or 5 miles a day. I was lifting. I was doing basically anything and everything I could just to stay active, just for the mental side of it, to like stay mentally sane. And it was like even that was a super rough like 2 month period that happened, that I wasn't training. Like not even like physically, my body hurt worse. My body hurt more not training than it did training, but like mentally wasn't. It was definitely one of those things that I was like, I just have to, keep my head down, do what I can to kind of stay mentally sane till everything gets back, because I'm not good when I'm not training.
That's it's so interesting. Let me I want to ask you almost like a philosophical question here. Do you think that because a lot of people that I talk to in jiu-jitsu feel that way. Like, there's so many people that I've spoken to on this podcast have brought up COVID and brought up like how much
Mm-hmm.
it like showed for them that jiu-jitsu is like a therapy, basically. It's like a medicine in a way. Do you think that it's just that all of us are like jiu-jitsu addicts, and we are just like, we have like some sort of weird withdrawal from jujitsu because it's like an addicting thing? Or do you think that it's almost like everyone has that, but most people just don't know about jujitsu because they almost don't know what they're missing, if that makes sense? Like, where do you think what do you think is going on here?
I think it's more so the people that feel that way. It isn't necessarily in jujitsu. I think if you put them in anything that you needed to dedicate your time to get really good, I think people that feel that way, you have the people that during COVID, they're like, yeah, I missed working out, blah, 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 but it wasn't a super crazy thing. They were more so just not being okay, being isolated. I think you're people that really, they're like, I wasn't okay mentally. It would be the same thing. Let's say if you took that exact same person, they didn't jujitsu, but they did another sport or something like physical that took a lot of like mental energy and physical energy. I think it would be the exact same thing. I don't think it's necessarily that they're like addicted to jujitsu, that it is, as more so it is that the grind and the mental, I don't want to say mental toll that jujitsu takes, but it takes a mental fortitude. We'll say that. And that you get not only doing that, but you get the strengthening aspect of it. And I feel like jujitsu is much more a mental sport. I would even compare it more so. It's gonna be funny. Ballet, I feel like, is a very mental sport. It's physically hard as well, but it's very, if doesn't matter how strong you are physically, if you don't have the mental side of it, it's not gonna work. And I feel like people that do jujitsu super hard, that need that, you need that constant stimulation almost with it.
You know, it's funny. Earlier, you brought up gymnastics and being really into gymnastics before you got into jiu-jitsu. Could you give us a little bit of like a comparison between the two? Like, I guess, how are the two similar, and in what ways are they different? I mean, I guess the difference is pretty obvious. In jiu-jitsu,
Yeah.
there's two people fighting, and in gymnastics, there's one person doing gymnastics. But you get what I'm saying.
Yeah. So I obviously can't speak to the elite level of gymnastics as I was never elite. But I was around it. My siblings were elite gymnasts and I was in gyms that some of the athletes, not that I was training with, but my siblings were training with because I was too little, later went to the Olympics and that side of it. I think it's very much that like it's very much a mental sport. Yes, there obviously any sport is a physical sport, but some are less mental than others. And I feel like mentally, there's something that you have to keep kind of pushing with it and going within yourself. And one thing that it is, yes, in jujitsu you need other people to train with, but gymnastics is a team sport as well. I don't think if you don't know a lot about gymnastics, you don't realize that yes, you have like your individual sport as well, but if you don't have the strong team, you don't have it either. So in that way, it is very similar to jujitsu, and I feel like both of them being very mentally taxing. You know, if any gymnast at the high level you see them, it is a very mentally taxing sport. However, I think that it's just very similar to jiu-jitsu that it also help, while it can be taxing, it can also help you build, that fortitude and that strength with it. And I think in that way they're very similar.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's funny because there's a lot of comparisons between jujitsu and chess all the time. People talking about how jujitsu is chess on the mats. And I've always thought that gymnastics was actually a much closer
Hmm.
comparison because there it's almost like jujitsu with
Yep,
one person,
exactly.
something like that. But that's really cool. And I think that that's really interesting because you see a lot of people too, like what's his name, the boogeyman. He came
Hmm.
from breakdancing. And
Yep.
earlier you were talking about ballet. And it's interesting how a lot of dance is very similar to jujitsu, especially if we're looking at breakdancing. A lot of they actually have a lot of moves that look similar. Like
Hmm.
I've taken a few breakdancing classes, and they do moves that look similar to like doing a sit out or doing something like that. Or I don't know. It's you get what I'm saying. It's
Yeah, no,
interesting
I
how
completely get it.
there are these different comparisons. There are these different things. Is there anything that you, I guess, focus on from a fundamental perspective? When we're talking about high level athletics, like something my coach is always drilling into us is like, focus on the principles, focus on the fundamentals. But I love asking high level competitors this question. But what are these principles, in your opinion, that people should be focused on? Like in jujitsu, we always talk about, oh, you got to focus on the principles, but what are
Hmm.
said principles that people need to focus on?
I think that makes it hard when you start getting to the higher level, especially because I feel like in anything, when you get to the higher level, especially when you're first starting, right, you have all your rules. Okay. And you always tell like your white, blue, and even some of your purple belts, you're like, don't break these rules. You cannot break these rules. You don't do that, right? You don't do this because this is going to happen. And if you watch a lot of high level black belts, you break all those rules. But the thing is, you have to learn the rules first and like the specific things you're supposed to do. Like, okay, when you're in side control, like you're not going to push up and frame, right? You're going to get arm barred. But if I can push fast enough and bring my leg through, I can do that. But I would yell at one of the white or blue belts for doing that because you don't know how to do it correctly yet. You don't know how to break the rules correctly yet. And I think it's that makes it hard because when you get so far away from it, if you're not right directly in it, like telling them exactly what to do, it makes it hard to be like, okay, here are the exact principles. I think, keeping your frames, obviously, not letting people control your hips, very, very basic things that then do apply when you're older. But as far as like the exact principles, the other day, I was messing around with the body lock from the back when the person's standing and jumping on the back, and one of the brown belts is like, oh, when I do that, I always slip off. How do you do that? I was like, well, it's wrong. You shouldn't be doing what I'm doing. I'm just saying if I can get away with it. And so that kind of makes it's one of those things, especially now that
That's
I'm
funny.
not teaching day to day. I kind of mess around with it more about the stuff like you shouldn't be doing. And it's always interesting to see, you almost forget the stuff you're not supposed to be doing and
Yeah.
the stuff that cause if you get away with it, you're like, I wouldn't teach it, but if I can do it, I'm gonna do it.
That's really
So I think
interesting. I love that. I love that question. And one of my coach, he's good friends with our head coach, who's James Krause from Glory MMA, and he said that they've been talking about this a lot. And this question of like, when is it okay to break these rules? And he brought up one of my teammates, Marshall, who's on the podcast recently. Shout out to Marshall. He just won his most recent professional MMA fight. And there was a
nice.
moment where the guy, he had the other guy had a Kimura on him, and Marshall went to the ground to get out of it. And Mike, our coach, was saying, he's like, never in a million years would I tell someone go to the ground to get out of the Kimura. He's like, you should
Yeah,
try to break it from standing. He's like, you want to avoid the other guy's trying to get you to the ground. But
exactly.
Marshall just dropped to the ground with it, and he was able to kind of Gumby his way out of the Kimura. And Mike was like, man, he's like, I can't tell Marshall he did the wrong thing because he got out, but it
It
worked.
worked.
Yeah, it worked. But he's like, I wouldn't teach that. So
Exactly.
it's amazing that you would say that, because we were just talking about that, like, last week. And that's I think you're so right. Like, I mean, look at someone like Jeff Glover, who's like one of the top competitors, one of the most exciting people to watch. But all the stuff he does is completely backwards. It breaks all the rules of what
Exactly.
you're supposed to do. But he's, he'll go down as a legend, So that's fascinating. So I just wanted to ask you too about this. Like, I know I'm kind of jumping around here, but I had a few
Yeah, you're good.
questions, written down. So there's there's a lot of talk right now about jiu-jitsu growing and about it
Mhm.
becoming more mainstream. And you just recently competed at the biggest world championships ever, with every time that I hear the number of how many people were at ADCC, it increases. At first it was 10,000 people were there. Now I've heard it's 12,000 people. Now I'm hearing it's 15,000 people
There
were
were a lot of people.
there are a lot of freaking people. So the sources, but I'm sure the history books will say there were at least like 25,000 people there. But I just want to ask, like, what was it like competing in that environment, and competing at really the mainstream of the sport, so to speak? Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it was great being able to compete at that and getting the opportunity to go there, especially being the first time that I qualified. I was 16 and then I blew my knee out and ended up being 22 the first time I actually competed at ADCC. The only thing I would say is I wish they had more weight classes because it makes it rough because I was fighting in the heavier division, and if anybody saw any pictures or anything, there's a little bit of size difference there between me and basically the other girls in
Minor.
that bracket.
Yeah, it was
Just a little bit,
it's a
just a
mild
little
size
bit.
difference.
There's a pretty significant size difference, and then there's also you hear like, okay, there's only 8 girls per division, and then there's only 2 divisions, so there's 16 girls. But it kind of doesn't really click in until you go and you're competing and you're in the back room, and like there's a big, you see the number of guys there are compared to girls. There's as many girls in the entire tournament as there are men in one bracket. And the guys have 66, 77, 88, 99, 99 plus. There's literally 5 times the amount of men in the entire competition that there are women there. That would be the only thing that I would say kind of sucks. And hopefully we'll see that start to change. There's been a lot of talk about adding more weight classes and kind of having more girls in there, but being able to go and experience and competing at that is great. And seeing how big it is and kind of trying to hide in the back room from all the people. Because there
Yeah.
are definitely a lot of people there, but it was great to be able to go and experience that and be part of that and put down in history, even if it didn't go the way I wanted it to.
I want to stay on this just a moment longer, because I think you brought up something really big, and it's something I was thinking about when I was watching ADCC this year. I was like, why are there not 16 women at least? And like, that's the other thing. I was like, like
Yeah.
there's only 2 divisions and there's 8 women in each division. I was like, why are they not at least maxing it out at 16, just like they do
Hmm.
Like, could they not find 16 women who are savages? Like, there's so many savages who are doing jujitsu who are women. You know what I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying? Like, I'm sure they could find another 8 savage women to fill out that bracket. So I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's money. Is it sexism? Like, what is the deal here? Like, do you have an opinion on this? Because I want to get to the bottom of this, because I think you're right that I don't get why they're not at least maxing it out. What do you think about like why?
I think it makes it hard because I've talked to Mo and he does want to um put more bracket. He was trying to this last one, because I was talking to him about it. But I don't think a lot of people realize Mo isn't the one that makes 100% of the decisions. There's still other people. He's the one that puts everything out and plans it. However, he still has to go back and hey, this is what I want to do. Do I have your stamp of approval, basically? So I think a lot of people are kind of getting mad at Mo on stuff, and I don't think people realize just because he's the face of ADCC, basically, there's always someone else kind of, behind it. And so I'm not nothing at Mo. I know Mo was trying. I was talking to him about it beforehand, how he was trying to put more um, divisions out there. I think even more than putting, I would obviously want 16 women in each bracket. However, I think more than anything, they need at least another weight division because it's even 132. So 132, you have, Maisa Bastos who's fighting. 132 is huge for her. The last two competitions she's been in, yeah, she's fighting. She's intentionally moving up because she wants to push herself. However, she's constantly weighing in at around 120, trying to be heavier. So, that's a 12-pound difference. And when you have girls like, Bia Mosquita cutting down, Bia's closer to my weight and Bia cuts all the way down. That's a huge size difference that you're having. They fought first round. You could go back, watch the video and see the big size difference. I think they would need to move the 132 needs to be moved down, and they need to do like a 55, a 66, and a 77 at least. At the very least, that's what they need to be doing, just because you have a huge size difference on both sides of it. It's not even just, I think a lot of people are thinking, oh, well, it's just the heavier bracket that you're having those huge, weight discrepancies, and it isn't. You have the huge weight discrepancies even in the lower weight class because you have like Maisa Bastos, who is normally a rooster weight or a light feather, which is really small, fighting, lightweights that cut to lightweight. It's a big weight difference between when that's happening. So I think they need to change the one that they have, make it lighter, do one that's a little bit heavier, do one that's a little bit heavier than that one, and then go over just for starting though, not for staying like that, because you
Yeah.
have a lot of people that are like, oh, well, it's because there aren't that many girls. How many girls do you think that normally fight rooster weight or light feather are going to go fight at 132 when you have girls that are cutting down that are normally lightweight that cut all the way down purely because the next one is over and they're just too small for that?
Yeah.
You're not going to have girls that show up for that. It just doesn't
Yeah.
work.
And anyone who says that there aren't enough female competitors just isn't paying attention.
Yeah.
There totally are. There's more women signing up for jiu-jitsu every day. And there's
Yeah, there's a
more.
ton of women.
There's so many. Like, just at our academy, there's been like a massive increase in women signing up lately. And it's, I mean, and there's women who are black belts who've been training for 10 years who are
Yeah.
beat. You just, again, it's like if they gave them the opportunity, if they made the slots open, if they had the extra weight categories there, I'm sure they could find someone. So, but you're
Definitely.
totally right. There's so many complexities to it. And like, there's so many people who have never run a business, who have never managed a team, who are going to be the what they call it, the armchair quarterback, or whatever you want to say, who are going to talk about the ADCC group. And ultimately, they're doing a great job. But it's
No, they are.
like,
They're doing a wonderful job in helping grow the sport.
oh
And
yeah,
I don't envy any of the guys. I don't want to be the one putting on that stuff. That's why I'm an athlete. It's the same thing, when people complain about the rep, I'll tell them they're not doing a good job, but at the same time, I don't want to be repping. I
right.
don't I don't envy that at all. There's a reason I don't do it.
That's a great point. And it's hard. It's so hard. I ran an AGF tournament a couple weeks ago, or I didn't run it, but I helped work it. And yeah, it's hard just running the scoreboard. Like,
Yeah.
I was stressed out running the kids tournament. It's like, oh my God, like I messed
But you
up
got
at
all the parents screaming at you.
Oh yeah, I messed up at one point because I looked this way and I like missed an important call, and the ref came over. He was like, "What the hell are you doing?"
He's like, "What's wrong with you?" You're like, "Ah."
It's like it's a high pressure situation. But I
Yeah.
was like, man, but I was but because you got to be on, you know. But anyway, what I'm
Hmm.
saying is it's hard just running tournaments, just like an AGF or a local tournament. Like
Yeah.
so I get it. There's a lot of complexity. But again, if we're going back to this original question of like how are we going to grow jiu-jitsu, like you have to make, I feel like you have to make it equal. You have to make there
Hmm.
be an equal amount of divisions and brackets. I mean, look at
Yep.
judo and look at wrestling, you know, for example. They've for example, just as big of a bracket, right? Like it's the
Yep. No, completely.
same size bracket for men and women. And I think that's a great point. Or you know, you look at the UFC, they have women headlining events and they have giant, you know, they I think are adding more weight divisions and stuff like that. But I could be wrong on that. But Elisabeth, this has been awesome. We do have to wrap this up here pretty soon. But I do want to ask you just kind of one final thing. Where do you want to take things in the future for you? I mean, obviously, like right now, you're still in your prime. But I'm sure that you've thought or given some thought to like, what do you want to do after you're done? Like, are you planning on opening an academy someday, or do you want to get into something else? Like, where you feel like going after you're kind of done competing in jiu-jitsu?
Honestly, I have so many years left competing. I have, at least another 10 to 15 that I used to want to open a school. Now, after, being around it and obviously being one of the upper belts, you kind of see more of the behind the scenes. Maybe it'll change in the future, but at the moment, like, I don't have any desire to run a school. I would think, doing seminars and traveling and that side of it would be more along the lines of what I would want to do whenever I'm done competing. But hopefully that's not for another, 15 or so years. But I think people underestimate how hard it is to run a good gym. It's a lot of work.
It is a lot of work. And you're right. That's one of the great things about jujitsu is like there's a longer trajectory for how long you can compete. I mean, you see people competing until they're 40 and stuff
Yeah.
like that. So especially going back to how jujitsu is just kind of now taken off, like that's a big thing. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Um, but Elisabeth, this has been great. Thanks so much for coming on the show. Is there anything else you want to talk about, or put differently, like is there anything that you wish that I had asked you that we could have talked more about?
No, not so much. I think this has been great. Talked about some good things, and hopefully more people take the mental side of everything a little bit more seriously.
Yeah, I think it's a lot. I mean, if you hear high level athletes talk about it, um, obviously they train their asses off, but they also seem to spend a lot of time thinking about this or thinking about the mental stuff. Um,
Hmm.
and yeah, I really appreciate you coming and talking about this. We'll have to do this again someday, like maybe do
Yeah,
a part two sometime. See after you win, like after you win ADCC the next time it comes around.
sounds good.
We'll do part two. You can win the new you know, Mo will probably hear this interview and he'll open up a new weight division just for you. And then you can win that division. And then we'll
That'd be perfect.
it's a good plan. Well, anything you want to promote or like tell us where people can find you if they want to follow you and
uh,
see what you're doing.
yeah, if people want to follow me, you can always find me on my Instagram. It's Elisabeth Clay, BJJ. And as far as promote anything, I'm booking seminars right now, and I've been asked a lot about seminars in Europe. I will be in Paris in January, so if anybody wants one in end of January, beginning of February, not even just in, France, but Europe, because it's all super close over there, just message me on Instagram and we can talk about it.
Well, that's awesome. Elisabeth, thank you so much for coming on the show. And if you're listening to this, I'll put the links to connect with Elisabeth down below in the show
Thanks
notes.
for having me on.
Anytime. Thanks for coming.